Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Rhonda Schaffler, and today we're going to talk about strategies that small business leaders can use with their employees to try to keep everyone connected in this remote hybrid environment that so many of us are working in these days. So joining me for the conversation is Bryan. He's Chief Technology Officer at Poly, and I'm also joined by Patrick Knorr. He's EVP and Chief Commercial Officer at Astound Business Solutions. All right, before we get into our conversation, come and be a part of it. We have a text chat to the right of the screen. Throw some questions in there. We'll incorporate those into our discussion and also take the poll about remote and hybrid working, because we want to share those results as our conversation kicks into gear. So it's great, David and Patrick, to see you here. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Oh, thank you, Rhonda. It's great to be here.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
So let's start with the idea. Listen, remote work, it's not new. It's not unprecedented. Plenty of people were doing it before we had a pandemic. But then, of course, COVID-19 hit. We had many more people working remotely. What should companies be thinking about in this environment, which is continuing a lot longer than some people actually thought when it all started? So, Patrick, let's start with you. What's kind of the 101 that companies should have on their plate to think about as this environment kind of continues for a bit?
Well, I think one of the key things is to have a strategy and policies around remote work. You know, I think initially a lot of it was reactionary. I think, a lot of companies, including ours, found it worked better than expected. But as it matures, I think, having policies around what's what the home environment's like, and it's both around technology, but it's also around the environment. I mean, we require our employees to have a quiet space, so there's not distractions. If you have employees that are interacting with customers, you sometimes need to think about remote dress codes, and presenting to employees. So it's really kind of expanding a lot of the same things you do in a workplace, and trying to formalize things a little more. And I think that's the transition a lot of companies are doing, is trying to bring some more structure to that, both around policies as well as technology.
David, what can you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to start. And another key piece of that too, I agree that both the technology as well as the policies, and that can be, anything from dress codes to, helping people with getting the right lighting, the right equipment, the right sound. It's important too to think a little bit about sort of the roles or personas that people take in the organization. So someone who's an individual contributor, it may be very different in terms of what their equipment needs are, in terms of what the policies that are there, versus someone who spends their time talking to customers, talking to partners. So yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Think about the right things for the right roles, both from equipment and from policy.
By the way, we have people greeting us in the chat from their various remote workspaces. Jonathan saying this is the future for content creators. So I appreciate everyone who's chatting with us. I also want to get to the poll because we do have some responses. So I think this is a great thing to integrate in our dialogue today. So our question, what has been the impact of remote or hybrid employees to your business? 51% say they are working more effectively. 22% say working about the same, 18% saying working less effectively, and a small number, 7%, say my business has not had remote employees. So Patrick, your thoughts on that answer, on the fact that people feel like their employees are working more effectively?
No, I think as I mentioned earlier, I think that was to some people a surprise, and actually put myself in that category of how well it has worked, and I knew it had a place, but it really, not surprised by the results. That's what we hear from our customers. That's what we've experienced at our company. People are getting time back from their commute. People are getting, time back from needing to take a day off to meet the plumber. It really, and I think what people are finding is people are taking that time that is being recaptured, and they're happy to put it back into their work in exchange for that flexibility in the workday, and I think in general it's turning into a net positive, but there's still pieces giving up, which I think is where hybrid work comes in for some positions, where teamwork, and collaboration, can be more important. There's remote tools for that, but I think there's also value in sitting around a table. That's what my teams are actually doing this week is we're getting some face-to-face time, and there's still some value in that, but it's just amazing what can be accomplished, with the tools and technology that we have.
David, it's interesting. Somebody in the chat right now, Armin, says more hours, longer days. So, this is kind of the downside if you're an employee when you can be always on. So when we started the conversation setting policies, certainly this might be a policy that an employee wants to see their company set.
Yeah, we're hearing that from a remarkable number of people, right? Both customers and just end users, that, some of the reason we are seeing this numbers and this trend of saying, hey, there has been more productivity, is because there's more time there. There are more hours being put in. And some of that can come down to, hey, I'm not commuting. And so, there's more of that time. Some of it can come down, to Patrick's point earlier, I'll take an extra hour or half hour in the evening because I've had an hour in the day to talk to the plumber or do whatever. I've also personally, I don't know in this poll, but I've seen the trend numbers go up with hybrid versus just purely virtual as well, because people are very intentional about now the time that they do spend in the office. It's about getting in and collaborating. It's about working with others. And they feel much more comfortable spending arguably what was sort of the wasted time, doing an expense report or something like that. We can do it at home, in a time that's more convenient. But you're right. You do have to be careful that there are boundaries set there. And that's for the benefit of obviously the employees, but the employer as well, right? You don't want people to burn out or overwork. So
one thing I wanted to ask the two of you has to do with how to ensure your employees have a sense of belonging. And I want to turn to our chat because we have a really good question from Marcia. What recommendations can you offer to ensure that remote workers who remain productive do not miss developmental and growth opportunities because they're not in an office? So how do you really, Patrick, kind of zero in on, the employee who's worried about their career, who wants to advance and is, in a quiet corner in their bedroom trying to get some work done?
Well, I think actually the answer is the same thing, as utilizing the technology, and we're doing that for both employees that are not remote as well as remote, is leveraging video training, leveraging online training, and that really fits well with remote workers. And so really your in-office workers and remote workers have access to the exact same growth and training materials, and that's worked out well again for the entire workforce.
David, what about just connectivity and network issues? Like, let's actually dig in a little bit on the technology side, because if you have a bunch of people on an office meeting, right? It was easy to do this when you walked into a conference room. Now you have people here, there. What's the technology evolution been like to support this?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. And it's kind of runs a full gamut, right? I mean, there is an part of that is purely about the connectivity and the networking, right? Earlier in the pandemic, it was clear people who had better connectivity, who had better, higher quality broadband, there was a leg up there. And I think we've seen as things have moved on, businesses have recognized that they want higher quality connectivity. They want more manageable connectivity for the employees, so that when your kids come home and they start streaming at 4 p.m., right, you don't get knocked off of the video call. And it goes all the way through. It's not just the connectivity, it's about having high quality audio, high quality video, so that the remote side is heard and that they, get to put their best face forward the same way you do when you're there physically. So there's pieces of that puzzle, all the way along. You don't have to spend a fortune on it. Everybody doesn't need something really high quality, but you do need to make sure that there's, good quality, both connectivity and equipment, right? So.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to that, is especially in the hybrid world, where which seems to be growing, is also not just remote, but also the in-office, addressing those same needs in some cases, as well as the capacity, because things have shifted. A hybrid environment, you might have half your employees, doing, video and remote work with the other half of your employees. So you have your networking and bandwidth needs actually go up, even though you have half your employees there, because they're using more cloud applications and they're using more video applications to work with remote employees, even if the actual physical office footprint shrinks.
And that's true everywhere, right? Like the used to be that we were trying to get that one remote participant to feel like they were in the room. Now we have this challenge of getting a group across, some people remote, some together, to really feel that way. So yeah, it's a bigger challenge.
Lots of questions coming into the chat. And again, I'm grateful to that because they're great. So I just want to throw some more at you. We're getting some questions about, just the tools, right? I have Deb saying we're hybrid, but everyone needs to live on Slack. We have somebody else talking about a team-based project management system like ClickUp, so you can assign tasks. Now, I'm sure this is a challenge for some small businesses trying to figure out all these different apps, what makes the most sense, and how do you develop policies, Patrick, where you're being flexible, but you have to get everyone on the same page where there's efficiency and what makes sense.
Yeah, I think a collaborative effort, understanding, there's lots of tools available, and different businesses have different needs. I mean, some require visual collaboration, other ones it's much more about project tracking, and different applications are better at different elements. So it's really there's not a magic bullet. It's there's a lot of reviews and information out there. So I think it's about evaluating the tools that are out there and then making a policy, because I think the critical thing is to have a plan. I mean, because if you leave it up to the employees, some employees will say, I like this, other employees will say, I like that, and then they have trouble communicating because they're on different platforms. So coming up with something and saying, hey, this is what we're going to be on, and you can evaluate it and always make a change. But again, I think having a coordinated plan really is key.
David, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's, several bits to that. One, it's really important, there are people and there are times where you want to do video and audio collaboration, but there's also, and particularly if we want to have that flexibility of being able to do work at any hour, some of the asynchronous tools, things like Slack or things like being able to collaborate on documents, that's an important piece of that. It's also important, particularly for small businesses, to kind of recognize you want to set a policy that, hey, we picked app X to use internally, but we know we're not always going to be able to do that. Our customers are going to demand that we use their tool, that we embrace what they have. So we do have to be a little flexible with it. And that's a little bit of a challenge because it might mean more things installed. But it's still great to have one that you agree, hey, when it's internal, this is where we're going to go, kind of ground truth, if you will, of what we're going to use to communicate.
No, that's a great point about customers, David, because again, if you're dealing with end customers, you have to accommodate, their technology choices.
Yeah.
So we have a great question from Luvella, who wrote in, and Patrick, I'll give this one to you. What are some innovative examples of companies creating a sense of community for their remote employees?
I think there's several elements to that. I mean, there's, virtual cocktail hours, there's, virtual escape rooms. I mean, I think there's team building exercises that can be done virtually. I think something that we're doing, and again, unfortunately, the virus sometimes makes it challenging, but trying to do offsites where in addition to the remote environment, you do get together physically to be able to build those bonds and to try to create those opportunities at some interval, so that, again, kind of a hybrid approach to team building.
Another question from chat from Johan, I believe I'm saying your name correctly. There are certain skills you get from watching your experienced coworkers work in person for full remote. How do you ensure that a new employee gets that kind of non-direct training, just, hanging out and having a cup of coffee with somebody? And we hear this a lot too with new employees and younger employees. How do we do that, David?
Yeah, I mean, I do think onboarding and new employees is one of the most challenging things to get up and running, right? And we saw that even I mean, we make video equipment. We're a very video oriented company. But it's still, to your point, that really early being able to lean over and just ask a question from somebody who's a more experienced colleague. I've seen a lot of companies take different approaches to this, office hour type things where more senior employees will just leave something open, a chat or a video, and let people come in and talk, or even the whole group where they're going to say, look, we're going to have an hour-long meeting, but there's no real meeting, right? The idea is just that we're going to leave it open so that we can all kind of get together. It's still evolving. There's a lot of folks out there trying different things. And I think we'll see new software solutions to help with that too, because I do think that is one of the areas where you really do have that biggest challenge in the first few months for somebody really feeling that sense of belonging.
Just to follow up, David, I'm just curious from your perspective, like where are we if it's a baseball game? What inning in terms of new technologies and software? The way we're working now, will we look back at that and think, oh my gosh, it's so much better in the future?
Well, I have this dual role. So, because I reach out, but I'm a techie. So sales will tell me I should tell you we're further along, right? But as a techie, my attitude is we're always in the first inning, right? The technology is always getting better. We're always coming up with newer and more powerful tools. If you look at what we used even just 2 or 3 years ago, what we use today is completely different, right? And that's one of the things that I think is exciting about technology. But I do think things have matured a ton in the last 18 months, just trial by fire, right? So many users were playing with chat tools and collaboration tools. And as a result, they've gotten a whole lot better. But, as a techie, I hope there's still lots of room for really new, really cool things to show up. And hopefully we will look back and say, hey, how did we work without X, right? That's kind of the goal. So,
by the way, from the chat, somebody is jealous of your beard. So just FYI.
Thank you. This was pre-COVID, I should say. So yeah, it's not.
Yeah, it's my long hair as well. Go ahead, Patrick.
I want to expand on David's answer a little bit, because I think it's in the early innings, but even for a slightly different reason, not technology related, but I think businesses just operationally, how they're going to operate, I think is still in flux. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of change over the next couple of years as people figure out. I think we're in the very early stages from a business standpoint, how to optimize this kind of new world, new environment, what office space is going to look like, how people are going to utilize office space, when to get together, that whole hybrid. I think businesses are figuring out, and as they figure out, I think they're going to have new technology requirements on what they're going to want to see from an innovation standpoint.
Patrick, Ann asks about favorite accountability practices, which is kind of interesting, right? Because one thing with the remote work, maybe you want to work at 11 at night, but how are businesses holding their employees accountable?
Well, I think depending on the role, if it is based on deliverables, I think there's some built-in accountability. Are you producing enough, and comparable to your peers? So I think that's one way to measure it. There's other areas, we have a call center, and a lot, remote work for a call center has really been transformational, not just for us, but across that entire industry. One of the things that industry is seeing is to create accountability, because that's a call center, so it's not video, but getting cameras on there, just like if you're in a call center, there's a supervisor, potentially looking over your shoulder, seeing what you're doing and how you're doing it. Just having that be part of the expectation, really has increased productivity, in that type of environment, where productivity and efficiency is very important on handling calls and replicating kind of that checking in, but also replicating that assistance. So we talked about assistance in terms of open help. Is the supervisors, having an open log to where in real time they can raise their hand. Again, replicating that in-office experience of getting, immediate help from a supervisor supporting a customer.
I know you both managed your companies through the pandemic and this new normal we're in for now. What communication methods and tools did you use that perhaps we haven't mentioned yet? David?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for us personally, we're a very video forward kind of remote company. But from our customers, I think a lot of what we've heard that was really new and really, a little bit different was a big emphasis again on those sort of time disconnected tools, chatting and collaboration pieces. There was a good bit around being able to better share documents and be able to manage those, which is one that seems kind of obvious, but a lot of companies, it just didn't come up as much when we could go next door with a mem stick. And then finally, equipment, and particularly around making sure that the equipment that you pick, it doesn't all have to be overkill, but you do really want to make sure that people feel comfortable, I guess is the right way. If they feel like they're being seen, if they feel like they're being heard, you do get them to contribute to the conversation. So I think those are probably the three big things we really saw.
And Patrick, I want to go back to you, especially on the policy front, that you've really kind of tried to hammer home here, the importance of doing that.
Yeah, I think it brings some focus to that, and also forces you to think through problems you solve, including onboarding. That's forced us to bring more structure. I mean, because so much of what you need to do to onboard employee can be just informal. Sit down, they show up that day, and you walk them through stuff. And it really, remote work really forces you to think about, okay, what are all the things we need to make sure we communicate to a new employee that comes on board? So it really, again, brings more formality and structure to that. Another piece of the tools discussion is really, in addition to a renaissance of video, is unified communications. In addition to having time dislocation, geographic dislocation has become much more important, and having, communication tools that apply, to that person's office, to that person's home. And a lot of times now people are working from vacation or working from a remote thing. And so, really multiple locations and need to, externally and internally, be able to route those calls and route the communication and collaboration, regardless of the location.
It's a lot for small businesses to think about, but I really appreciate all the tips and advice that you gentlemen gave. And thanks to everyone in the chat for your participation. David, Patrick, so good to talk to you. Again, time flew by there, and I want to thank you for joining me. Also, thank you to Astound Business Solutions.